Hello, hello, and welcome to Keshanar Confidential. This is a series where we're taking a look behind the scenes at the making of the Kingdom of Keshanar, which is a D&D 5e setting based on ancient Egypt that asks the very important question, what if the gods, the magic, and the monsters were real? Today we are talking with the elusive Dave, the channel cryptid, who is kind of the man who's responsible for all of this in the best way possible. Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. And am I still the cryptid if now that I've actually finally got the interview nailed down? What?
I'm not sure if a single sighting counts or not. We'll
Okay.
put that question to the public.
Right. That's fair. So I'm Dave Haddon. I'm the CEO of Orthane Productions and creator of Kingdom of Keshanar. What else would you like to know?
How are you feeling? Because today, when we're recording this, is the last day of the Kickstarter.
What a ride. I've started a bunch of companies. I'm a serial entrepreneur and bunch of radically different companies and projects too. Like usually there's a theme, but not with me. The first one was historic building restoration, restoring temples and historic buildings around the world. And then I had a couple of software companies. I had an AI software company, I had medical software companies, training companies, many of which were successful. None of them were wildly successful. The last one did all right. But I can tell you that this has been as challenging as any incredibly complicated company I've ever started before because there's so many moving parts to it, not just the content creation and creating the actual product, which has its own challenges, but then marketing it because we're selling it all over the world. And like just dealing with VAT and like international taxes and shipping and fulfillment it's just a nightmare. It's like there's just so many pieces to this. And that's on top of the complexity of just launching, building the Kickstarter. Building a Kickstarter is really difficult. It's easy to make one that is going to do okay, like kind of a $10,000, $20,000 or less Kickstarter. But if you want to do a big one, then there's a whole business consumer marketing aspect that is a thing in and of itself. Because like everything I've ever done in the past with my other companies has always been business to business, not business to consumer. So that's all of this is new to me. And I know how to run a company and spot talent and that kind of thing. And I'm a quick study, but it's been a whole fresh slate of skills that I've had to learn and things I've had to figure out that have been really, really challenging. But I've had a lot of help from our great team, almost all of whom you've interviewed so far on this show, which has been very entertaining. You're a great interviewer. Kudos.
Okay, well, flattery is not going to get me to take it easy on you, Dave.
Like you ever have.
I do definitely agree that for better or for worse, definitely for better in my opinion, this was never going to be a project that aimed for mediocrity.
Yeah, I'm kind of a go big or go home kind of guy, I guess. The objective here was so in playtesting this content for decades. That's how I developed the thesis that it was worth sharing with the world because all the play groups that I ran through it really liked it and it kept improving and it was very engaging and people love ancient Egypt. It's got the mystery and the majesty and it's so much of our culture is inspired by ancient Egypt or directly derivative of ancient Egypt. And so that was the thesis whereby I built the idea that we need to share it with the world. And to share it with the world, you got to go big, right? So I don't have time, honestly. Like if I was 40, I make the joke like, I can't keep going like this. I'm not 50 anymore. Like if I was 40, fine. I could spend 8 years and organically grow an audience to 2 or 3,000 people, which is how most people do it. But I can't do that because I'm 60, right? So I need to get it going, and the only way to do that is to absorb the customer acquisition cost, which is it costs like somewhere between $15 and $30 to get any consumer to have eyes on any product that you create. Period. That's why Google and Facebook are like have balance sheets the size of small countries because they figured out a good way to make that happen. And so that's what we did. We just kind of like mortgaged the farm and said we're going to do this quickly as possible and really push it out there so that we can build an audience quickly. And that's what we did. So we're not as our Kickstarter is great and we're grateful, hugely grateful. I think we're pushing up around 400,000 now to all of our backers, the 2,200 backers. It's there are Kickstarters out there that do millions, right, in the same space as we are in, but they've been around for a really long time and they already have invested followers that, big following. and we didn't have that. So that's what we did is we kind of kickstarted the whole process by doing big marketing campaigns, and it was worth it because now we have very strategically identified the overlap between the Venn diagrams of TTRPG enthusiasts and Egyptomaniacs, right? So where those two circles overlay, that's the tiny slice of the audience that is our avid customers, and engaging with them and talking with them, and on Discord and on Keshanar Conclave and Facebook, and then traveling around to cons every month all over the country in Conshu, our van, and meeting them, and it's been just the best time of my life.
I've mentioned it before on this show that I feel like there are two kinds of people in the world: those that have had or are actively having an ancient Egypt phase, and those who just haven't had it yet.
I think that's fair.
So, when would you say that your ancient Egypt phase began?
I think everybody is always fascinated by it just from hearing about it. I mean, the Great Pyramid of Cheops is one of the seven wonders of the world. It's the only wonder of the world of the seven that's still standing. The rest all been knocked over by earthquakes or destroyed in some other way. And so it kind of stands alone, in that regard. Egypt is just just sheer unthinkable amount of effort and energy and that went into just creating the physical relics that we have, to show for that culture. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So that when you actually dive in and look at the art, which you and I have spent a long time kind of figuring that bit out,
Hmm.
the culture, the spells, the all the things that they invented that we attribute to other cultures, like our 365-day-year calendar. That's Egyptian. It's not Gregorian, right? It was invented by ancient Egypt, and we called it a Gregorian calendar, which is ridiculous. It's the Egyptian calendar, and they invented clocks, and they invented just perfume and just toothpaste, and just goes on and on. The way we still bury our dead in boxes, and embalm them, just like the ancient Egyptians did, right? And we don't even realize how much of our culture is so heavily influenced by this incredible culture that was building these incredible structures and monuments, moving 60-ton pieces of monolithic stone, which to this day no culture is, very few have been able to like model accomplish the same thing. And doing that for 3,000 years. I mean, gosh, the Western civilization is not 3,000 years old, and in the United States, our country's 200 years old. We only just had equality of men and women in the last, 30 years, maybe 20 years. The 70s, I think, is the last state that it kind of actually made that official, and in terms of voting rights and what have you. And yet the ancient Egyptians had that. Women could have authority over men, and property passed through the female line. And, so it was just as a more advanced civilization in a great many ways. Plus, it lasted for 3,500 years, starting 5,000 years ago. It's just got so much to offer that I think that once you get past the aesthetics, which, Leo brought this up in his interview, which I thought was a really good point, which is that so much of what we see in other adaptations or dialyzed attempts at depicting aspects of ancient Egypt, like in movies and books and what have you, are just borrowing from the aesthetics. And what we're trying to do here is really dive deep and be a lot more authentic without having it be an historical role play, because that would be very difficult to achieve and kind of put a target on our backs. The level of criticism, it's really hard to do that, because I don't think and there's so much argument just amongst Egyptologists, for instance, like what happened exactly when, and that canon is still kind of a work in progress. So trying to do an historical role play would be a challenge. That was
You're
rambling. I don't know if I
absolutely
answered your
right.
question.
So your answer is pretty much always.
Yeah, I was, and actually, it was really D&D that really set the hook in really deeply. So I was going to boys boarding school in Canada called Trinity College School, and it was basically like Hogwarts without the magic and the monsters. But it was, Hogwarts is based on this type of school experience, which is a kind of a British boys boarding school experience. And in fact, our eating hall there was it's identical to the Hogwarts one, like literally identical. You can't tell them apart because ours is modeled after the one that the Hogwarts one was filmed in England. And then that's where I discovered Dungeons and Dragons, because it had just come out like 5 or 6 years before then, and it was kind of hitting the AD&D rules had been released, and it was sort of hitting its stride. And so I discovered it there, and then that was just great because that introduced the missing elements, right? The magic and the monsters. And we had lots of time on our hands. We were living there because I was in Canada and I was lived in Pennsylvania, so I couldn't get go home very often, like 3 times a year, and played a lot of D&D. And the first modules that TSR some of the very first modules they produced were the Desert of Desolation series by Tracy and Laura Hickman, and that one was based on ancient Egypt, and I think it was a little bit aesthetic-y in terms of just because they're short, right? They're like 40-page modules, and they did an incredible job. They're just fantastic and best modules I've ever. But that really put the hook in for me because there's something about experiencing another culture, especially an interesting historical culture like ancient Egypt, through books and film and that kind of thing. And there's a totally different matter when you do it in an experiential learning fashion, like with role playing, right? Or like a real immersive simulation, which role playing is basically that. It's like a mutual immersive simulation. And that really, just got the hook in deep for me. And so that's when I started home brewing my own Egyptian themed content, and it's kind of just kept doing it on and off over the rest of my life. And then the last 4 years decided to actually publish it. So I'd been playtesting it pretty hard for the last 15, 16 years, something like that. And in the last 4 years, I decided to publish it and started commissioning the art, started writing all the content. So yeah, it's always been there. Yeah.
Looking back to the very first iteration of what would become the Kingdom of Keshanar, what would you say is the biggest difference between that version of it and where it is now?
There's a lot of differences actually. But there's a lot of similarities too. So I guess the lore is more sophisticated. It was very aesthetic-y to begin with. It was it was sand tombs and mummies, right? And pharaohs. And then the more I sort of like turn to Egyptian canon and what we know about ancient Egypt as a source of inspiration for kind of fleshing it all out, the more I realized what a bottomless well that knowledge base is, and how rewarding it was to dive into it, because the deeper you go, the more inspiration you get. So I think that it was like the groundwork was there, but it's a very different, very different place now. A lot of similarities, but it's really grown leaps and bounds. Even the name has changed. The original name of the project was Skandar. That's what I named it decades ago when I started it. And then when I decided to publish it, the first thing I do, because I know this from my experience starting companies, being a serial entrepreneur, is you got to go trademark the name so someone doesn't steal it off from underneath of you. So I did that, and I got that all started with my trademark attorneys. And then there was this kind of like the ball got dropped along the way, but I didn't realize that, right? So this is like a year later, and I'm already deep into writing it. And I saw a book come out called Skandar and Unicorn Thief, which is by a young author in Europe. And I was like, well, thank God I put my trademark in. So then I went to the trademark database test, the trademark search database, and it wasn't there. And I was like, what happened? I called the lawyers, and they were like, yeah, we sort of forgot to send it in. I was like, okay, and it was sort of my fault, sort of their fault. It was like really couldn't pass the blame. Like it was an email was sitting in my inbox somewhere that I didn't respond to or something. And so then I had to change the name. And so then it went through a couple. That was a really difficult, long process. I'm kind of glad that it happened because Keshanar is a better name, but it's also completely unique. Like it wouldn't have been competitive with that book, even if that came out afterwards. So that is our IP space. But yeah, no, it's been an arduous process to create this whole thing and to make it the big, very comprehensive project that we've intended it to be, and also to maintain that steely-eyed focus on authenticity without not in the historical sense in terms of historical events, because obviously the premise, like you said in the beginning, is like what would have ancient Egypt been like in a kind of parallel universe if the gods of magic and monsters were real. So the history unfolded differently, but based on the fact that there is magic and there was meddlesome gods that make regular appearances, and the magic is like not just stuff that activates in the afterlife, but is like everyday sort of active magical powers and properties. And so then obviously the history unfolds radically different. Plus all the different species and all the different monsters are real and wandering the streets and what have you. But in every other respect, it's super, super authentic. And maintaining that focus has been expensive, and time consuming because, we have an Egyptologist on staff who we interviewed, Dr. Jill Waller. She's amazing. And she's been just she said she's really liked the project because she never knows what we're going to ask her. Like tell me about the demons, and tell me about the different Dewat demons. Tell me about
Mhm.
spell 125 and the 42 negative confessions and all this stuff that we're trying to find. I talked about the Venn diagrams earlier. So basically, what we're doing with this project is we're taking Egyptian canon and Dungeons and Dragons lore, and we're seeing where's the overlap between those two things, right? And so we start there where there's a natural overlap and it's big. Those two circles intersect widely, and where there is that natural overlap, that's where we start with, because then it's creepy just how much of that is overlapping. Because like Luke Gygax said, the quote he put on our Kickstarter is that ancient Egypt was always a source of inspiration for his dad's work, and he's really looking forward to seeing what us Egyptomaniacs here came out with. But there is this huge overlap, and then from there we kind of expanded out, and then her job, Dr. Waller's job, is to say, okay, is to point out the bits that aren't. To point out that, so that we point out specifically the bits that are very much Egyptian canon, and it's sort of like a history lesson, sneaky little history lesson, and a really fun game. And then the bits that aren't, where we've had to gamify things to keep it really exciting and just keep that spirit of adventure for the players.
Yeah, shout out to Dr. Waller, because one of my favorite things about working on this project has been having an Egyptologist on speed dial that I can ask the most random questions.
It's like having the red phone, right? And that's what everybody says. Everybody loves that. Yeah, the writers, it's been really great for the writers, good for me, it's great for everybody. The artists, yeah, she's been really astonishing. And we just came back from RC, so we're a member of the American Center for Research in Egypt. They they support kind of Egyptian Egyptology projects and archaeology and study and research, and they have a conference every year in San Francisco. And this year we were invited to sponsor it. Dr. Waller and I actually put a paper together, but we kind of got it in really, really late. And I'm actually glad, because I think we'll do a better job of it if we have another year, because we'll have some data, from players using the game and going through the game, and we'll have a little bit more to talk about. Kind of really slammed it very quickly when I was actually in Egypt for the Keshanar Inspiration Tour. We kind of wrote the paper, collaborated on it. She did most of the heavy lifting. And so we're probably going to do that next year. And I've also got some ideas of an idea for a paper I'm going to do on kind of the masonry aspects and engineering construction techniques and in situ stone finishing techniques that the ancient Egyptians used. I've done a ton of personal research on that, because that's the area of masonry that my company was focused on many companies ago. The building restoration company is like the surfaces of masonry buildings, which is important because that's the part you're looking at. The whole building that you see is also the surface of all of everything. So maintaining the surface means you're maintaining the appearance of the building. But anyway, at RC, we went there, we sponsored it, we met a bunch of Egyptologists. I met Dr. Stuart Smith, who is the Egyptologist from Stargate, consulting Egyptologist, and he also worked on the Mummy. And he was talking about Stargate, and I asked him, I'm like, so all of those extras, for that whole town, right, where they're all talking, he's like, they're all speaking ancient Egyptian. And it's like, wait a minute, all of them? He's like, yeah. Like it wasn't like they were just all speaking Arabic and you just kind of let it slide because no one's going to understand the difference. No, every single extra in the movie, every single thing they said was speaking in ancient Egyptian. And it was like, that is a level of that's a profound level of commitment. Now, of course, it's aliens and spaceships and stuff, but everything else was as authentic as they could possibly make it. Went to great lengths and trouble to make it super authentic. So meeting people like that and getting their opinions about what we're doing, he was really fascinated by what we're doing. He's really into it. He spent a lot of time with us, just hanging out at our table and talking to all of us. And then also there were some really great papers. Like there was one called "The Mummy as Cyborg." It was my favorite one. And so it's talking about how they would, by embedding these different magical amulets in different parts of the mummy, it would give them kind of superpowers and either maintain a certain level of functionality or give them extra functionality in the Dewat in the afterlife. And talk about fodder for for gamifying stuff like that, and for the game, for Keshanar, it was amazing. Plus, whole groups of Egyptologists, and like there's a whole bunch of them I think in Berkeley. It's a whole group of Egyptology students that all have a D&D group that are going to be playtesters for us. So what better playtesters than actual Egyptology students?
Okay, I feel like I should have invited a third person to the podcast who would be solely responsible for keeping both you and I on track, because we're both nerds and we are both big ol' history nerds.
They wouldn't get a word in edgewise if we did have a third person.
Right, I feel like we need someone that would actually have, like, some kind of an electric prod or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Like that.
Looking back over this long evolution of Keshanar, was there a particular moment during the development where you felt like, oh, yeah, this is for public consumption? Like, I have to put this out there?
Wow, that's a good question. Yeah, I think it was, I've started a bunch of writing projects. I started a bunch of book projects that kind of all made it halfway and petered out. And, it's a lot of work. Writing a book is a lot of work. And so I've got a half-finished book about motorcycle accidents, dissecting motorcycle accidents to understand how to avoid them because I ride motorcycles. And I wanted to create something to kind of increase the knowledge base around motorcycle safety and riding safety and that kind of thing. And so I did it by interviewing a bunch of people that survived motorcycle accidents and what they learned from it, and we can avoid that from happening. I get most of a book about medical simulation training because I invented online virtual AI-enabled patients as a training experience, kind of like a flight simulator for doctors. So that was I had two companies that back to back that were kind of in that area and to train doctors in infectious disease in Africa and around the world, and also supporting clinical trials and what have you. So I guess it was really after the playtesting it twice. So I ran two parties through the homebrew, right? Over the within the last 15 years, maybe 16 years, that went all the way through level 1 through 20. And it took 2 years. And those games were really good. And I've always wanted, so that's the book tie-in, sorry. So I've always wanted to kind of like write something, like, and so all the writing projects I've ever done have been scientific papers, and which is funny because I don't even have a degree. I have a high school diploma, but I've got a bunch of peer-reviewed scientific papers that I've authored and co-authored with other physicians and whatnot from all the company different technologies that I've created, started, and data that we've accumulated around their implementation. But I've always wanted to like actually write something creative. So I had these other two books that I started, never finished them, and it was after those two big runs through the campaign. I was like, okay, at this point, I should just publish this. And so I sold my last company, and it was to a Nasdaq company that just kind of like, I didn't have to. I just was able to just walk away. So it gave me the time to think about doing that. And so instead of just hit the golf course or going sailing, I started Orthane, and it grew pretty quickly, and I think that it like the team, you and everybody that you've interviewed, what an incredible group of people that it's been very mutually inspiring to have all those folks, come on board, and and I do have this sort of go big or go home attitude, so it spiraled from originally I just wanted to just kind of throw it out there, right? Like just write it, stick it up on Drive Through RPG for $10 and people can have at it. And of course not. So instead it became a giant thing, that we're the big team and just really a massive marketing, surge behind it so it can really push it out to a lot of people. And then of course having done that, now it's got to be really, really good. It's got to be perfect. So it snowballed pretty quickly and I don't regret it. It's been a lot of work. It's been as much work as anything I've ever done in my life. Any company I've ever started in my life. This one has been as much or more work as any of them. I guess basically because it combines those two elements of like you've got to create this creative piece, which is write the material, which is more difficult than writing a book. Because when you're writing a book, you can decide in what order you want to have your expository text describe the world. You can't do that with the TTRPG setting. You have to describe everything all at once, all up front, because you don't know what the players are going to do. And you've got to like have it all finished, right? Not the campaign necessarily, but the setting. And so that was really challenging. It's actually a perfect platform for now going off and creating fiction, on top of that later, if we decide to do that. So it was, it's just stunning amount of work to create that. Because on top of all that creative stuff, you have to launch a business, to sell products internationally. You run a Kickstarter, people from like 50 countries buying your products. You got to figure out taxes and shipping and fulfillment and all that stuff for that. And there aren't any like really ideal solutions in place for that. So it's still very hodgepodgey. We're still figuring out the best way to go about it. And then of course tariffs dropped right before we launched the project, which screwed up our entire fulfillment plan. So it's been it's been a journey, I tell you. And then and to stay relevant, we got to go to all the cons. So we're doing a con once a month too. So we got to find time to finish the writing, deal with all the business aspects, run the Kickstarter, and drive around to 8 or 12 cons a year. This is how I'm spending my retirement. It's great, working harder than I've ever worked in my life, and having more fun too.
That's the important part.
Yeah, really is. And learning so much too. Learning so much about Egypt, and just that it all comes back to that. I keep saying that all roads lead to ancient Egypt, and it seems like they do. Uh, so many amazing discoveries in our culture, and so many things that we do every day, items that we use, and attitudes that we have, and practices, that behaviors we have that come directly from ancient Egypt. Because there was this melting pot, right, of cultures of Judeo-Christian and Egyptian concepts during kind of like Ptolemaic Egypt at some right, that where it all sort of blended together, and then and everybody that went into Egypt got Egyptianized, right? So when Alexander the Great conquered it, and then the Ptolemaic period started, they all became Egyptianized. And then I think that happened with a lot of cultures, and that's where the roots of this culture, this Egyptian culture, kind of like had its influence on Western civilization, to the point where so many things that we attribute as being Greek or Roman aren't. They go back further. Like we think of the phoenix, right, as a Grecian concept, but it's not. It's the Bennu bird, and Herodotus added a few things to it, and kind of adopted it. But so much of Grecian culture and Roman culture is influenced by Greece, and Grecian culture is influenced by ancient Egypt, and all that influences us. So that's been just really illuminating, just diving into this and realizing how much of everyday things about our culture and Western civilization is incredibly heavily influenced by this culture that doesn't essentially exist anymore. There's no active practitioners, right? This has been really interesting.
You mentioned that part of the plan and what's been happening with promoting the Kingdom of Keshanar has been attending a lot of conventions where you are running a lot of one shots, correct?
Yeah, yeah, the one shots are great, and the way we do that is we make them all in Keshanar's past. So because the what we're putting out this year, right, is the setting book, and then the campaign, 1 to level 10 campaign. And so in order to not give anything away about the campaign, we run all of the one shots, the con one shots, in Keshanar's past. So in that way, there's no spoilers for the campaign, and also the players get this kind of sense of like they haven't participated in Keshnar's history, so that when they come into the actual campaign, they'll have some familiarity with it and some comfort with like what Keshnar is all about and its culture and everything. And then also there's references to things that happened in the past that they, through other characters in those one shots, may have actually participated in, which is kind of a cool hook.
Have the players that have gone into this, have they had any assumptions or, predisposed notions what it was going to be about?
At the cons?
Yeah.
Well, they know it's Egyptian themed. That's about it, really. Because the descriptions aren't that, they're pretty brief in like tabletop.events, or whatever system's using to manage the games. But people, they love ancient Egypt. They love, well, Perfect Trap is one of our, that which is all about cats. That's always been a super popular one. People love cats, and ancient Egyptians love cats. There's just so much to love about ancient Egyptian culture, and the gods are so interesting and big personalities, and there's so many of them, and it's been a war horn, right? It's been a rallying cry for that Venn diagram overlap, and so we've been pulling all those people in, and there's been other really solid content that's been produced, that's ancient Egyptian themed, just nothing at this scale, and nothing that's been an entire setting that is decades worth of work, and that's had an actual Egyptologist on staff. That it seems like that. I think at the surface is like it's just a game. Isn't that overkill? It's really not, because I think of it as like it's unlike a movie. This is like an experiential version of a movie, right? Where you kind of absorb the experience based on decisions that the players make, and the world reacts to it, instead of just sitting there watching it happen like in a movie or a book. So that provides huge advantages in terms of the willing suspension of disbelief. Those little details about the culture. Like you and
Mhm.
I have had discussions about, so, okay, what kind of clothing are they wearing? What kind of clothing was available? So how were those fabrics produced? From what products? Oh, okay, so it's like linen or it's flax or something. So you had to grow this or that. So we had to have, that's how we defined other provinces in Keshnar. It's like which ones grew the kinds of crops that would, or the kinds of, or had the animal husbandry that would support the kind of clothing they would have had. And so that's modeled the kingdom of Keshanar, pretty accurately, similarly around the way that ancient Egypt was modeled from a social and economic perspective, right? But those details, they help with the willing suspension of disbelief and help really immerse you in the setting and help you become more deeply invested in your character and in the experience, and pay more attention and really dig into what's happening in the game. And then when players do that, the kind of magical, meta effects that happen when that's role playing experience is super rich and interactive like that, and I call it the great DM in the sky. It's like, wow, I didn't see that coming, and that just happened all by itself, because of all the crazy things that happen. Like, you get a lot more of that.
I'm an absolute sucker for the little details in pretty much everything all the time. I think
Yep.
that in like the very first interview that I had with you, however long ago, I told you about I'm a video game nerd girly by default. And I told you that one time my partner and I had spent an entire weekend with Elder Scrolls V Skyrim just analyzing what these one particular swirls on rocks meant.
Nice.
And I
I love it. And
so all of these
how
little
rewarding, right?
details. Yes,
Because it meant something, right? Because it actually meant something. It wasn't
absolutely.
just a bunch of scribbles. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, so we want it to be that level of authenticity where people go up and they look at the hieroglyphics on the obelisk in the 3D city, Unreal Engine version of Keshanar, which is our interactive map, and they actually go to the trouble to try and unravel what it means, and they're going to see, wow, we actually meant it to mean something specific.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a lot of extra work, but it's super worth it. And it's we're just uber nerding out on this, and it's a lot of fun, and the players appreciate it.
Have people that are brand new to the setting, like at these conventions and then playing these one shots, have they been, shall we say, surprised by the level of duff that we've made for this?
Yeah, yeah, it is kind of shocking. Like, no one's ever gone to the trouble to create a complete 3D model of the setting. So, city of Keshanar is like the capital city. Is the kingdom is huge, but the capital city is based on a river delta with the giant river, the Tefnut River, not the Nile, but it's very similar, geographically speaking, in terms of how Cairo is situated. And no one's ever gone to the trouble to actually build the whole thing in 3D. I wasn't going to do that either. I had a map that I just sort of you plagiarize and beg, borrow, and steal when you're doing homebrews, because it doesn't matter. You're just creating a game for your friends. So it's what it's how you do it. And it's like, it doesn't have to be original. And some of it is, because you're homebrewing, but you use whatever stuff you could find. And so I had this giant map of Jerusalem that I had photoshopped, and I chose that one because there was other ones that were like, I'd had one of my players. I talked about this actually in one of the live streams, and my players asked, why didn't you use like an old one of Alexandria? And I'm like, well, the Jerusalem one just really worked because I had this big central sort of palace-like structure, which of course was the old temple in Jerusalem, but it just worked for the basic scribbly drawing I had for what Keshanar should look like, and it was huge. So this etching is the size of a wall, and the scan was huge. It was like 100 megabyte scan. So it gave me the resolution I needed to Photoshop in all the pyramids and the other things that I wanted. And it worked great for a while. But then when I decided to publish it, I was like, well, I need to go make a map, a real map. And so I kind of wanted to get somebody to kind of redo this. And I found Bella in Hungary, and he did a couple of versions early on. I was like, nah, it's not really going to work. He's like, why don't we just do it in 3D? Like, I'll just build it all in Blender. I said, what a great idea. Do that. And so over the course of like 3 or 4 years, he built the whole thing in Blender. And really didn't have that much experience with 3D stuff at that point. I'd done a little bit in some of my simulation companies, but nothing super heavy, like game level stuff. And then he had finished it really, and I had the idea like, okay, so wouldn't it be great if we could walk around in it? I mean, it's 3D, why not? Right. So drop it into like a Unity or Unreal and walk around in it. But the problem is like he had designed it in such a way as that all the buildings were everything was about a third of the size it was supposed to be, that it should have been. And so it didn't have the level of detail. And so, but at that point, I was kind of like I sold myself on the idea that I want to run around in this city, because we're going to go to the trouble to build it. It can't just be for like taking screenshots and art. You want to go be in it, because that creates like a tool that DMs can use to help visualize for their players like the whole experience, like walking around the city and doing things in the city. Because most of what happens in the first part of the campaign in Keshanar all happens in one city, in the capital city. And so it's not like a lot of other campaigns where you do the three things in this town, you go to the next one, do the three things there, go to the next one. Everything's in the city. There's 250 locations that are really detailed, 33 temples. It's a mile across, 25 million square feet, tons of plot hooks, NPCs. It's all there. You can just play for a year in that city and never get bored. So we flushed the whole thing and started over from scratch, rebuilt the entire thing in Unreal. So then it was like a 4 or 5 year project all in to produce that thing. And it was funny because like there's really not that much you can do in it. It's not a game. There's no NPCs you can talk to. There's no stuff you can pick up, and we might add some of that later. But we're not trying to create a video game. We're just trying to create the ultimate map, the ultimate D&D map, and that's what it is. So it's 25 million square foot city, very meticulously detailed, very intentionally architected, based on the way ancient Egyptians did their civil engineering, and also extrapolating those architectural styles out. That if you had magic, you could make things a little bigger, a little grander, and then over thousands of years, how would they have evolved, and adding some high fantasy elements, but all ancient Egyptian themed. And now we have that. So we have like this entire 3D city, and we've added the features that we've added to it is like as the game master, if there's an ambush in an alleyway anywhere in Keshanar City, you can just push a button and it creates the VTT map for you, and you can adjust the lighting, and that's the thing that we've created that is completely innovative. Like that's never been done. So that's we're proud of that, and it was
Oh yeah.
hugely expensive, but it's something that I think will probably catch on. Did the same level of diligence in creating it as we did with everything else. Like Jose, you just had an interview with him, but he's our illustrator, but his background is he's an architect. So what I would do is I would create scribbly drawings, and I did some art in high school. So like I'm not a completely rotten artist, but I'm not a good one either, not even close. But I would do some elevations and the rough styles that I wanted that were sort of extrapolations of ancient Egyptian styles, like from Edfu and the Temple of Horus and Luxor and Karnak and different structures, that we have as relics from ancient Egypt, architectural relics. And then I would give it to Yelze, and Yelze would create these beautiful architectural elevation plans, and then hand that off to the Blender team, which is Mitch and from Masterwork Studios, who you also interviewed. Like Miguel would create them in Blender and give it to his brother Yas, and Yas would drop it into Unreal and texture it. The textures we all created, together. And a lot of the monuments and everything, we had other 3D modelers that would do that, 3D artists. So it was this real whole process to create all that stuff. And plus, it's really a heavy file too. It's 6 GB file. You need like a
Mhm.
pretty, even though all you can do is run around in it. But boy, so when we just released it for the alpha testers, so you can actually go through it now. And we did one of the things we did is we planted Easter eggs all over the city so they could find them and get prizes, but digging around. And then also we did bug bounties, so they find glitches in it, they can get points and prizes for like finding glitches in the system. And anywhere you go, you can just push a button and instantly export your VTT map to because that's the problem with VTT, right? Dungeons and Dragons map was never really a thing. You just throw your erasable grid map out and just draw it on there. Like, okay, you're in a room, looks like this. You throw your minis on it, boom, good to go. But with VTT, which is an amazing innovation, because now you can form a party from anywhere in the world, which is great.
Mhm.
But you got to have a map. Like just a big white grid is just not good enough, right? So now there's created this market for people to create all these maps, but it's a lot of pressure for the DM creating a VTT experience to like have to go and find the right map or create something. But now, if it's in Keshanar, you just go to wherever it is, push a button, strips all the tops off the buildings, you can adjust the lighting, it puts the grid on it, and bam, in 1 second you have any map you want. So I think that more and more those kinds of innovations, like these kinds of tools, are going to
Mhm.
evolve from this project to support, the kind of the DM's toolkit.
I definitely think that once people that stream, you know, TTRPGs get a hold of that and realize that that is something that they can use, because that's one of the biggest complaints that people have that watch these streams is like it's really hard to get excited when visually all that you have to look at are, five talking heads and maybe a grid. But with
That's a
this
good point.
Unreal, I mean, it's completely different.
Yeah, and then we also do animations, right? So we make these little sort of 3D animation things for different introducing different aspects of the city and different places. There's one on our YouTube channel, our Theme Productions YouTube channel called Welcome to Soul Crush, which is Aura standing there, one of our NPCs. He's a Shushatine from Apep Small, and she's like, "Hey, welcome to Keshanar. I'm glad you made it." And you meet the heads, Zach, the heads on the spikes, that are kind of like the Dusker heads because the Tomb Raiders, that their punishment is they have to spend 50 years reciting their crimes, which was Andrew's idea, which is fantastic. And we animated that whole thing like a little cartoon, but it using the 3D city and just by animating the NPCs using Unreal. So yeah, that would creating those sort of cameos where you could, because it's interesting. Some people have trouble visualizing. Like
Hmm.
if I ask you visualize an apple in your mind and describe it to me, you'd be like, well, it's a red apple and the light is shining on it, so there's a shiny spot and it's kind of waxy, but I also polished it, before I put it in, my mind spot there, and it's got a black stem. But a lot of people are like, they don't see the apple. They understand the concept of the apple. They don't see it.
Hmm.
And and so I think that when you have theater of the mind games like Dungeons, like D&D or any TTRPG, that having tools like this to help, create that visualization for people, again, also kind of really deep. And I think that's, I don't know if you, in your experience with gaming, but some people just don't get into it, right? It's just like it's not my thing. They want to, they sit around the table and they try to get into it, but they don't engage, and they want to, or they're playing with their partner, and so they're trying to, but it just doesn't work for them. And I think part of the reason is because a lot of people just can't really visualize as naturally as others. And
Hmm.
so having tools like this to help people get a sense of what's really going on and that's one of the great things about twitching games too, also, honestly, is because if you're getting ready to run something, watching some other DM run it first can really help pull all the threads together for you.
To shift gears here just a little bit, without giving too much away, Dave, what from the lore are you most excited for players to get their hands on?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. The lore has evolved a lot. It's evolved a lot recently because it's evolving on a J curve. So it started out with the Phoenix Covenant and the fundamental premise behind the initial campaign. But then kind of my co-writer on that now is Marks, right? Who I think you have to interview him yet. And he just quit his, high-paying tech job, like not kidding, high-paying tech job to come be poor and write, TTRPG stuff with me here at Keshanar. And when he and I put our heads together, great things happen. And so we've really taken the core lore that is the story behind what's going on in Keshanar. We've extrapolated it all the way back to the beginning and all the way out to the end, which was it took a lot of time to do that. And it was probably, 10 working sessions of 15 hours apiece, figuring all that out. And it couldn't have happened early on. It had to happen after like a lot of it had been developed because it needed to be a base, like a well-developed base and a play-tested base of just the lore that's kind of like just the last 1,000 years, right? Before we go all the way back into the dawn of time, into the end of time. But having done that, then now is like, first of all, it's creepy how cool it is and how many bizarre like hooks into actual ancient Egyptian theology match up perfectly with D&D lore and with the Keshanar lore. Like the overlap there is just creepy and weird. It's so tight. And so it's the thing I'm most excited about is for players to start to unravel the whole story of what's really going on. And it's going to take 2 years. It's going to take
Mm.
2 years to go through the whole thing. And so I've been really excited about, like, a lot of people want to plunder it for their homebrew, and that's great. Do it. Like take Kesnar City, drop it into your homebrew. That's just a sort of Egyptian-y themed city with some stuff going on. Great, do that. But more power to everybody to go about doing that because DMs run their own stuff. But if you teleport players into this, from scratch and run them through the whole story, it's going to be rewarding, and it's going to be a
Mhm.
lot of hair standing up on the back of the necks kind of moments that happen as a result of going through that. And so I've done that twice, but I haven't done it with the level of sophisticated lore that we have now. And so that's the thing that excites me the most is getting that out there. So we're signing up playtest groups now. So I've been putting out to all the initial backers, like the DMs that have groups that want to run the Keshanar story whole cloth, the whole campaign, instead of just like dropping in like the city and a couple of pieces or whatever into their own homebrews. And so we're going to start playtesting that this summer. I'm really looking forward to getting feedback from players about that. But I think that that's the best part. The best part of the whole thing is what's really going on, and the layers of conspiracy and the nitty-gritty political theological realities of what's going on in the world, and how the ancient Egyptian canon, like authentic ancient Egyptian canon, lines up so beautifully with D&D lore, specifically, the 5e lore, and then Keshanar's, and Keshanar being in the middle of all that, and how it all ties together so beautifully to create this really amazing, sort of rich, colorful, interactive, surprising, scary, interesting arc of narrative that the players get to build together.
All the creatives that I've had on this show absolutely hate it when I start with these questions, but it's my show and I do what I want, so you're getting it also. Do you have a favorite faction in the city?
Huh. Yeah, that's also a really good question. I think I do. I think it's Cult of the Phoenix, which is nobody knows much about that yet. I think that's why I like it, because I only just recently figured out what it was. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff that I just sort of made up as I was going along. Like, it seems like there should be something kind of related to that, right? And then I'll figure out what it is later. But then there's some interesting piece of ancient Egyptian canon that just plops right into that perfectly, like that jigsaw puzzle piece. It was like, wow, I didn't see that coming, and isn't that cool? And it totally works. Yeah, so there are the factions in Keshanar are really cool. I like the rivalry between the noble houses too. So if because if you're blood of the pharaoh, then you get to take all your stuff with you, right? So you take astral versions of all of your any personal effects you take on your Mesiket, your solar bark, you get interned with. You get astral versions of all that to take you into the next life, and so that's kind of like your superpowers, is part of your privilege of pharaohdom. But that's true of anyone who's also related to who directly has the blood of the pharaoh. And so a lot of noble houses, that creates a lot of contention, and so there is actually sort of sanctioned, illegal but hired, tomb raiders to go and to like raid other nobles' tombs to kind of like deprive them of the ability to have those things. So even though it's the worst possible crime, to is tomb raiding in Keshnar, there's a lot of it that they do when they weaponize it against each other, to take away all the physical items so that the astral version is destroyed. And it's just like it takes a while for the complex intra faction kind of politics to develop and to gestate, because that lore all has to kind of flesh out and has to have some history associated with it too, so that there's some resentments and that kinds of things happening. Yeah, so that's starting to happen. A lot of it's happening as a result of the playtests and the one shots, and we're starting to really exercise all these things and seeing and building that level, that kind of detailed sort of history, right? So that all those politics can start to become more complex and more engaging.
That's one of my favorite things about this setting, is there is kind of a duality to it as both a player and a DM, where yeah, you can do the usual, monster slaying, kick down the treasure, steal the door sort of play, which is fine and that's great. But there is also a flip side of that, where there is political intrigue and there is kind of a slower burn storytelling aspect to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it mixes dungeon crawl with everybody loves a dungeon crawl, everybody loves a big fight, and it's definitely got all that. And I think that all D&D modules have done settings anyway, have done a pretty decent job of kind of balancing those elements together, so you get a little bit of both. So it isn't just a giant dungeon crawl, or or just full political intrigue, and in role playing without any kind of action. So yeah, yeah, that's and it takes time. It takes time to do that, and to do that well, for sure. And it's all got to be play tested before you release it, or else it's not going to be good.
Speaking of dungeons and monsters, you are plunked down into Keshanar. What is the one monster that you want to avoid the absolute most?
Ooh. Hmm. Well, the Mirage, if it's Keshanar, the kingdom of Keshanar, and it counts like all the surrounding desert and everything, then the Mirage demons are pretty bad
Mm-hmm.
because they play on your biggest weakness, right? So you're making it through this gigantic Catharan desert, and you're out of water, and there's very little water in that desert. And then you see an oasis. It's like, well, there are oases, here and there, and they also just sort of pop up. They pop up because of the nature of how the interaction between the dry lightning and the sand and all that kind of stuff. And so then you approach the oasis and find out it was an illusion. It's actually a mirage demon that's there and starts sucking all the moisture out of your body, try to make you part of its collective. Um, those guys are bad. And then the city, I like the sewer harpies. And so that was another of Andrew's contributions. Andrew Fields, he just kind of threw out sewer harpies. Anyone when we were brainstorming, and I was like, "Oh, that's dumb, sewer harpies," you know. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Oh yeah, it became like our greatest creature, right? So I helped flesh out the backstory for him. So the idea is that when Ramendon and the Memnonese, his tribe, they came to the delta where the fertile delta where in the Tefnut River where Kesnar city is. It was occupied by all these abominations of Apep, so they're twisted kind of creatures that have been worshiping Apep and got all chaotic. And they had to fight a war and beat them all into the ocean. But some of them, they were kind of fiends, right? Some of them went down into the Mesa, into the cracks in the Mesa, and retreated that way. So most of them, a lot of them were killed or forced into the sea, but some just went down and they entered this sort of chrysalis phase. And they come out on like locusts at certain times, like every 10 years, every 20 years, whatever, and then come up to the surface and they attract their prey by imitating the sounds of like children that have fallen in troll holes and are trapped in the sewer. Help, come get me. Because like when I was living in Israel in Haifa for 5 years, that cats meow to interact with humans. Like they don't do it to each other. They do that exclusively as a way to communicate with humans. And so they do it at a tone that imitates one that we respond to, which is children, which is why we also select for puppy breeds, for dog breeds that have big eyes, and certain kind of features because they look like babies, human babies. And so that's just like selective evolution. And so the cats in Haifa, where I was living, at night they would caterwaul in such a way as it sounded exactly like children calling for help. Absolutely creepy, to the point where we would go outside looking for them, thinking it was a kid. And it wasn't. It was just this cat. This is caterwauling in this way that sounded just like a human. So that's what the sewer harpies do. So then they come up to the surface, to the sewer level, to the downtown, and then call up through the troll holes, the garbage chutes, help, 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 come get me. And then people come down thinking they're trying to rescue some kid that fell down a troll hole, and they get eaten by the sewer harpies.
Anyone that's listening to this hasn't seen the art of both the Mirage Demon and the Sewer Harpy on our social media, go look at it right now. Like, pause this and go look at it
Yeah,
because
Dariush.
they are terrible and awful, and I love them.
They're so good. Dariush makes the best monster art. Oh my god. So good.
Yeah, shout out to Darius, the guy who's making, the monsters come alive for us.
Yeah, we really
Okay, so
zoomed in. We have amazing artists.
oh, yeah. Okay, so assuming that you don't immediately get erased off the census by a monster in Keshanar, where are you heading to first? Like, what is the one site that you would go see, like, immediately?
Oh, also such a great question. The water line is beautiful. God, there's so many amazing sites. I guess Temple of Ra, the radiant pillar that appeared when Ra made his second revelation to Memnon, and then Memnon stepped into the radiant pillar, and that's where inside of that celestial space is where he negotiated the Phoenix Covenant with Thoth as recording it, and with Ra and Memnon negotiating it. Sort of the contract whereby divine magic is bestowed upon the Keshite people in exchange for their worship and commitment to the true pantheon of gods, the Ennead, like the Egyptian gods. And then they built the temple around that. Then it never went away. He stepped out of it with the tablets of the Solonite tablets of the Phoenix Covenant, but the radiant pillar never went away. And so then he built the temple around it. That is a cool building. So I'd like to see that in real life. And the waterfront. The waterfront is fantastic. Corlinthor Bay is shallow and very clear and clean because the Keshites are just absolutely obsessed with purity and cleanliness. So all the sewage and the effluent from the downtown doesn't get ejected from the city from like kilometers away, to the east, into the ocean, and so far away that it doesn't contaminate the bay, and and to pollute is just like a sin, and like um, and there are real and effective consequences. So the bathhouses are nice. The bathhouses are amazing. The duas. And the temple, of course, the temple of the palace of the pharaoh is amazing. And then, of course, what's the deal with that big beam of light emanating out of the top of the Great Pyramid of Memnon? Nobody knows what that's all about. And yeah, like this one is fantastic because the art is amazing. It's the great megalith of statue of Sekhmet, goddess of healing and harm, goddess of war and
Hmm.
destruction, and also healing. And sitting on top of the necropolis, that was done by Carrie, who's one of our 3D artists. Because we've got about 10, just 10 or 12 3D artists. I don't know what Jordan did, like. What do we have, like 30 or 40 artists that we've gone through, to get the ones that we
Easily.
have, and yeah, and the actual art that we have is got to be produced by it's going into the book by at least 20 artists. So there's a lot of great stuff to see in Keshan that is beautifully and lovingly crafted and very meticulously. That yeah, if it was realer than it is now, realer than it is an Unreal, then yeah, I would love to go and check that out, or go have a beer at the Rock and Roll Cafe, or Beazel Pub.
I really liked what you said about the art because I feel like with these books, like they're really nifty, like TTRPG books, obviously. But even if you're not into that, they're honestly just kind of gorgeous books to have around.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the limited edition covers. We slaved over and put so much effort and energy into developing the two covers for the Kingdom of Keshanar setting book and the Book of Gates, for all men on the Book of Gates. But then Yosei came up with those black and gold limited edition covers, and like those the best. They don't have any art on them. They just have very, very lean, One has like the
Hmm.
Phoenix, the other one has like just the hieroglyph of Gate, for the hieroglyph for Gate. And I love those covers. And having thought about it in the beginning, I probably would have made a decision to just make those the covers for all of them, and just not have limited edition covers. Make those the covers instead of the big splashy sort of like action graphics that are on the other ones. But those are really just beautiful.
So to move away from the lore here for a minute, let's say that someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I've got a great idea. I want to run a Kickstarter." What would be your number one piece of advice for someone who wants to do something like this?
Probably take time and build the audience organically, which is how most people do it. And also definitely seek the advice of people that have done it. This is something that you don't want to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes no matter what, but the mistakes are very expensive in this process. And sometimes they're unfixable. Like if you screw it up in how you plan it and execute like a Kickstarter, once you go live, it's too late. You can't do anything about it, and it could really severely hamstring your ability to be successful. There's a lot of those things in this industry, that a lot of those bear traps that you can't unstep out of, once it snaps shut around your leg. So you really want to definitely reach out to other creators that have done it before and seek their advice. They're usually pretty generous about offering it and trying to help you, because there's not really competition in this space. Every project's unique, and so there really
Mhm.
isn't competition. It's like we're all just creating new stories and new adventures. That's kind of a beautiful thing. So it's like rising tide raises all ships, and we just keep rising the tide, by creating more and more content and expanding the table, getting more and more people interested in it. Definitely seeking the advice of people that have done it before is the most important step, so that you can avoid some pretty fatal errors that can be made if you're not careful.
So, as we mentioned at the top here, this is the last day for the Kickstarter when we're recording this. So, by the time this is out,
Right.
the Kickstarter will be done and over, and I'm sure we'll all have unclinched a little bit by then.
Yeah,
Uh,
it'll get to shift into
for
finishing up the project and delivering it. That's just great.
Yeah, for those that missed out on the Kickstarter, how do they go about getting their hands on this after the fact?
So we'll have late pledges, and there's a pre-order store in BackerKit, and we're setting that up right now. So you can just go in there and for the next 90 days, you can do pre-orders and late pledges. You can do late pledges in Kickstarter, and you can do or in BackerKit, the Pledge Manager, and yeah. So you just go to the Kickstarter and you can still back it. You lose, it's a little more expensive, I think. There's some, there's got to be some benefit to doing it during the Kickstarter, right? But you can certainly get in on it, get in on the Kickstarter, bundles and experience those savings and some of the unique stuff that we've created for that, which won't be just broadly commercially available until after every backer has been delivered to. So that could take a year. We're hoping it's a lot less than that. A lot of the stuff that's part of our campaign, like the D20s, which are a replica, because the ancient Egyptians invented the D20, of course, and just like so many other things, of course, the D20 is one of them. The math rock of destiny, and it was the one that we're modeling our replica after is one that was found in a tomb in 2200 AD, and it has Coptic Greek numerals on it and was used for some kind of game, and we don't know what. And there's another one that was found, Diandra Oasis, I think, or anyway, there was another one that has hieratic writing on every facet of the D20 of the that is representing a god, 20 different gods, which is really cool. So maybe we'll do that one for the next one. And but all of that stuff we've already been accumulating over the course of the last year. So that's the one thing we did do right. Is or didn't the big mistake we didn't make is we already imported all that stuff and manufactured all that stuff and kind of like stockpiled everything in advance of the Kickstarter, so that when the tariffs dropped right before we launched our Kickstarter, it didn't have that as big of an impact on us, although it did completely screw up our printing and fulfillment plans, so we had to kind of start from scratch on that. But at least all the manufacture of the physical goods, that part was already kind of in hand and ready to go.
Well, the good news is then for anyone that's missed out on the Kickstarter, all hope is not lost.
Yeah, well, we still got, what is it, 12 hours. Of course, but you're right. By the time this comes out, it'll have been too late to actually get in on it at the Kickstarter level. But it's okay. It's just, I think it's like a 5% difference. You can still participate in as a late backer. Late just for the next couple of months, you can still make a pledge.
All right, we are going to enter the very serious journalism portion of events now.
I've been dreading this.
So I hope you're ready.
Uh, there's no way to be ready. I never know. I know no idea what you're gonna. I've been contemplating, maybe in a better word, whether cereal is a soup or a dessert for weeks already in preparation. It's not helping me.
Okay, well, you and I have both discussed previously that cold pizza is truly the food of the gods.
Yeah, we turned it into
So,
D&D content.
right. So, I'm not gonna go with the easy question of whether pineapple belongs on a pizza or not.
Okay.
Okay, so let's say you have a slice of pizza and before you eat it, you fold it in half. Do you then have a taco?
Ooh, or is it a calzone?
Mmm.
No, it's not a taco because the wrapper is too thick. I think it's a calzone. How do you come up with these? They're so good.
These
My favorite
this
part
is
of the
what I
interview.
think about, instead of work.
Oh my. Yeah.
Okay, well, usually at the very end here, I ask people if they have any personal projects or anything they want to promote, but I feel
This
like,
is it.
yeah, we've kind of already covered that.
Oh yeah, no, I've got nothing else going on in my life, that's for sure. This is it, and it's and no regrets about that either. It's super rewarding, and now we have all these backers and these fans that have kind of come out of the woodwork from all over the world. I've got this person I've been dealing with like day in day out, who's one of my alpha testers, who's from New Zealand, and going through the 3D city and finding all this great stuff, and just all kind. And people have come to the cons that have been like Phoenix tier, top tier backers, just to meet us, and we've got to interact with them, and now they're going to be playtesters, and so we're building this community of Egyptomaniacs, role players and DMs. That's, I think, is going to be really really vibrant, and it's going to go on for a while. So this has been super rewarding experience, and I'm looking forward to the years to come as we get the next two books of the campaign out, and then after that, it's on to other places in Orthane because so it's a big planet.
I personally am very excited by Elsewhere in Orthane also. I'm a big fan of Alain Ruel.
Yes, well, that was really you guys. So Alain Royal was just nothing. It was just another country. It was just the big enemy of Keshanar, big Cold War political enemy. And I think when I very first conceived, it was just like I just sort of dropped a Babylonian mythos in there, just like as a placeholder, and from the deities and demigods, and then it was sort of like going a little leaning more Oriental, but there was nothing original about it. So Elanrel is 100% you, Leo, and Andrew. Like you guys came up with what that is, and it is really cool. And you don't even know yet because of this big lore expansion thing that we did, where we went all the way to all the way back to the beginning and all the way to the end. But I know why their gods are masked,
Dun dun
and the answer
dun.
is a stunner.
Oh,
Really
okay.
cool,
Well,
and it fits in with what's happening in Keshanar. It fits in with everything. So, but yeah, you guys are gonna need to come back in and flesh all that out because you came up with that concept of the ivory tower orcs. I love it. Super
all right.
sophisticated,
Well,
ancient orcish culture.
yeah, it's such a diversion from the usual,
Yeah.
stereotypical orc whatever. They're very classy.
Yup. Artistic. Erudite, and yeah, good taste.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting about everything Keshanar. I'm sure that you're probably going to do another one of these at some point here, down the road.
Yeah, for sure. As it starts to roll out, we can talk about how it's going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. Well, this has been another episode of Keshanar Confidential. To find more information, we can be found across pretty much every social media platform, including Facebook and Instagram. We can also be found on Kickstarter. Just search for Kingdom of Keshanar. My name
And
is
we're
Lady
both
X,
and
or
we're
both.
both uncouth bystanders of set.
I am an uncouth bystander of set, and I
Have
hope
you
you are
told
too.
Absolutely. That's my mythos. Have you told the listeners where that came from?
I have not.
Should we?
Okay, okay, okay. As like a special, like an encore, everybody.
Yeah. So it was an accusation that someone leveled at us in a comment on Facebook. And we read it and we said, I feel so seen.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're the
And it
first
was
one to adopt it as like your mantra. And I kind of slotted right into the wind tunnel created by that immediately, thinking, well, yeah, who's not an uncouth bystander of Set? I love Set. He's such an interesting character.
it was such an unhinged comment also. Like
It's,
everything about it was just so weird.
and he was really super intentional. He wasn't even kidding.
No. It was very like he was serious.
To forevermore, we shall be uncouth bystanders of Set.
Yep. That's us, Dave.
I'd have to get that tattoo.
Oh my gosh, right? Okay, well, it's happening.
Yeah, in hieroglyphics.
Oh, okay. I
I
see
wanted
it.
to get a hieroglyphic tattoo. Now I know what it is.
That's the one, obviously.
That's it. That's the one. I'm doing it. It's not even kidding. And Gianluca can do it because he's a tattoo artist.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, put Gianluca on notice.
Yep. Brilliant. Well, this has been a real pleasure.
All right.
Thanks. Take care.
All right.